Hi, fourth graders, and happy Wednesday. This is Miss Denise, and I will be picking up from yesterday's lesson with Miss Leslie. We read Casey at the Bat, and today we're going to look at that poem again, and we're going to write our own poem. So, by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to examine elements of a poem and define how a poem differs from a short story. And then also, you're going to write an original narrative poem using poetic devices to engage your reader. This lesson continues with Ernest Lawrence Thayer's poem from the previous lesson, Casey at the Bat. I hope you guys enjoyed that poem. I most certainly did. It's one of my favorite poems. And it has been around for a very long time, which is a sign of a good poem when it stays around. Generation after generation can enjoy it and can also relate to it. So, my boys play baseball, and it is my favorite sport for that reason. So, I love this poem especially because I feel like I'm there with the crowd as I'm reading it. Let's look at our vocabulary again. Um, you went over these yesterday with Miss Leslie, but we're just going to revisit them. The first word is defiance. It is a noun and it basically means disobedience. If you are defiant to your parent, that means you are being disobedient. Our next word is ease. It's also a noun, and ease is a feeling of comfort or relaxation. You're not worried at all. And we know that Casey walked in onto the field with ease. He was not worried one bit. Fraud is a noun and it is a dishonest action. So the crowd was accusing the umpire of fraud. They were said that he was being dishonest. The next word is lusty. It is an adjective. An adjective is a word that describes something. And so if something is described as lusty, it is healthy and strong. Melancholy. Melancholy is a noun and it means sadness. Multitude, we've had that word before this year. Multitude is a noun and it means a large group. So the patrons at the game, there was a multitude of patrons watching this game. Patrons is a noun which means people who support something, or fans. So the poem actually gives us a specific number of fans. Do you remember how many fans were watching the game? If you don't remember, we will jog your memory when we read the poem again today. Stern is another vocabulary word. It is an adjective, so it describes something. And if you are stern, you are strict or harsh. Maybe you have a teacher that you feel is stern. Stricken is an adjective that means upset. So Casey was stricken at the end of the poem. He was upset with the outcome of the game. Visage is a noun, and that's a face or the expression on someone's face. Our literary vocabulary, so these are specific words that we use for this type of writing. So the first one is hyperbole. A hyperbole is an exaggerated statement. It is not meant to be taken literally. For example, I've been waiting forever. uses hyperbole to state that the speakers waited a long time. Now, have they really waited forever? Well, no, it just means I've been waiting for a really long time. Or you might say, I have a mountain of homework tonight. So, do you really have a mountain of homework? No, not quite, but you feel like you have a lot of homework. So, you're exaggerating the amount. It's a hyperbole. And then the last term that we have is quatrain. And a quatrain is a 4-line stanza. So as we look at Casey and the Bat, you'll notice each stanza has 4 lines. It's a quatrain. All right, we're going to read Casey at the Bat together now. And I hope you enjoy it. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville 9 that day. The score stood 4-2 with but 1 inning more to play. And then when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. So in the first stanza, it is not looking good. It is Mudville is losing, and the score is 4-2, and they're in the last inning. Now, I see a hyperbole in this first stanza. Cooney died at first. Did he really die? No, it means he got out at first. And then Barrows did the same. So a sickly silence. The crowd got quiet and they just felt ill because their team was losing. And notice also that each stanza has 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, space. 1, 2, 3, 4, space. So each stanza is what we call a quatrain, 4 lines. Also, I want you to notice that it rhymes. Day, play, same, game. And even in the second stanza, we have that, bat. So a poet might use rhyme just to help with the flow of the poem. It almost feels like a song when the lines rhyme at the end. This poet also uses rhythm. Rhythm can be used in poetry, and again, it makes you feel like a song. It has a pattern. It's called meter. And this poem uses iambic pentameter, which basically means every other syllable is stressed. All right. So we'll talk some more about that after we read the poem. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope which springs eternal in the human breast. They thought, if only Casey could but get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. So they feel like if Casey can just get up there to that plate, for sure we'll win this game. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake, and the former was a hoodoo while the latter was a cake. So Flynn preceded, that means goes before Casey and also Jimmy Blake. Now, the poet describes them as a hoodoo and a cake. So do you think that they have a good reputation? Probably not. He was a hoodoo and a cake. So basically, the poet is describing them as goof offs, and not a lot of faith is put into these players. So the crowd is grim and melancholy or sad because they just feel like this is it. This is the end. These two are goof offs. They're not going to do anything good for us. But Flynn let drive a single, which means he made it to first base, to the wonderment of all. And Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. So he hit it so hard, the cover came off of it. And when the dust had lifted and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. So, wow, they surprised everybody and actually made it to second and third base. So maybe there's a chance. Then from 5,000 throats and more, there rose a lusty yell. So 5,000 people in the crowd yelling with this big, strong yell. It rumbled through the valley. It rattled in the dell. It pounded on the mountain and recoiled upon the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. Their hope has been renewed. They think, yes, here comes Casey. We've got this now. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing, and a smile lit Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat, no stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then, while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance flashed in Casey's eye. A sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather covered sphere came hurtling through the air. So the sphere, of course, is the ball. A sphere is round. So he's talking about the leather covered sphere, which is the baseball, came hurtling through the air. And Casey stood a watching it in haughty grandeur there. So he just watched that ball come by. Haughty means you're proud and kind of conceited, think you're better than everybody else. He just let that ball come right by him. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches, black with people, there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a dim and distant shore. Kill him! Kill the umpire! Shouted someone on the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult. He bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the dun sphere flew. But Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said, Strike two. Fraud! Cried the maddened thousands, and echo answered, Fraud! But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain, and they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate, so he's beating his bat upon the ground. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. That means he swung that bat so hard, you could almost hear the air shatter. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere children are, or hearts are light, and somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. All right, so again, did you notice the rhythm in this poem? It follows a specific pattern, and this is called iambic pentameter. Can you say that? Iambic pentameter. Every other syllable is stressed. So it makes it almost like a song. It's telling a story, but it almost feels like it's a song, not just a poem. All right, so we're going to talk about the difference between poetry and prose. But before we do, I want you to take a break. I want you to pause the video, maybe go grab a snack or something to drink, move around a little bit, and before we go on to the next part, okay? All right, so hopefully you paused the video and took a little break, moved around a little bit, get some oxygen flowing. It's just good, take a break. I call it a brain break. All right, so we're going to talk about poetry versus prose. How can I tell the difference? Well, prose is just a story. So think about at the beginning of the year, we read a story called A Good Lie. So that was a fictional story. It was not a true story, but it was kind of meant to teach us a lesson. But it was just written in paragraph form. Each paragraph was indented at the beginning. It had complete sentences all the way through. Poetry is different because it has specific elements that are only used for poetry. So it doesn't always use complete sentences. Sometimes it can be just a word on a line. Poetry has lines and stanzas, right? So here are a few specific elements that I wanted to point out. The first one is alliteration. Alliteration is when beginning sounds are repeated, and Casey at the bat did use some alliteration. It said the silent, what was it? The silence. Let's go back and find it. Here we go. A sickly silence. So that is alliteration when you're repeating the beginning sound. Sickly silence. Okay. And there was more throughout the poem, but you just come up with, as an example, 5 frogs were frolicking in the field. Okay, that is alliteration. A verse is just a line of a poem. And a stanza is a section of a poem consisting of lines. So in Casey at the Bat, we know that each stanza had 4 lines, which was called a quatrain. Rhythm is a pattern of beats in a poem. So when you read, it has a sing-song manner. Okay. And then rhyme is when the words have the same ending sound. So rhyming is kind of fun to read. If you think of Dr. Seuss, a lot of his books, like The Cat in the Hat, have rhyme at the end, and it just makes it easier for us to read it. It's more entertaining. All right, so the next part is actually in your poetry journal. So if you have your journal, you can go ahead and get that out, and it looks like this. 13.1. These questions are found in your poetry journal. So if you want to pause the video right now and go find your poetry journal if you don't have it with you. And then when you come back, you're going to turn to 13.1 in your poetry journal. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, so you can pause the video right now if you need to and come right back. All right, boys and girls. In your poetry journal, the first question that it asks you is, what is a stanza? So what is a stanza? We've talked about it. A stanza is a group of lines in a poem. So you can go ahead and write that answer down. If you need to pause the video to write your answer, you can. A stanza is a group of lines in a poem. How many stanzas are in Casey at the Bat? Let's go back and count them. How many stanzas? All right, we're back at the beginning of the poem. So we have, oops, too far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 stanzas. So go ahead and write that in your poetry journal. How many lines are in each stanza? How many lines did we say each stanza has in this poem? I hope you said 4. Each stanza has 4 lines. This is called a quatrain. And what are the rhyming words in the first stanza? Well, let's go back. And I pointed these out when we were reading. In the first stanza, we have day, play. That's your first set of rhyming words. Day, play. Write that down in your journal. And then we have same, game. Same, game. That's your next set of rhyming words. All right. Now we are ready to move on to our writing assignment. So in the rest of this lesson, you will write your own narrative poem or poems that tell a story. A narrative, remember, is a story. In Casey at the Bat, the townspeople were surprised when Casey struck out because they thought he was too good for that to happen. They were disappointed because the game didn't go the way they expected. So you are also going to write a poem about a time that something didn't go the way you expected. So think about that. When was a time you were disappointed in the way something turned out? And it's very important that you watch the next video because I'm going to also share a time when I was disappointed, and I'm going to show you what your poem should look like. So I will walk you through that each step. So make sure that you watch the next video, okay? That is your writing assignment. All right, you can turn to, you can turn in your poetry journal to 13.2, and you can write this next part in your journal. But if you do it in your poetry journal, you'll have to take a picture and send it to your teacher. I also made a Google slide where you can write your answers on the Google slide, and then you can turn it in digitally through Google Classroom. So your teacher would probably prefer that you do it through Google. But if you're more comfortable writing it in your journal, just handwriting your poem, that's fine too. You can answer these questions and hand it in via picture. So I'm going to stop this video now and we're going to switch. And so your next video will actually be your writing assignment. Okay. So I'll see you guys back here in just a second. All right.